hide it when you're eating. So today's topic's a very, very interesting one. It's about language and critical thinking. And the more you think about language, the more fascinating it becomes, in that your very life is connected to the words you use. And your opportunities in life are connected to the words you can use. So if you're thinking of becoming a teacher or a nurse or a mathematician, it's only when you learn the words of teaching, maths, or nursing that you actually will have any skills or knowledge or understanding of what's involved. People down the road from me when I was growing up were into cars, and they had all this language about cars. And so it's that language about cars that gave them so much more knowledge and expertise in the cars area than myself. And then I had knowledge of things that my grandparents taught me about gardening, etc., that gave me expertise there. So your life is shaped by language. Let's begin today's class on language and life and critical thinking by praying and a Bible reading. Heavenly Father, we do pray today. You'd help us to better understand language and concepts in language and the way they can help us in our life journey, in our teaching, and in thinking carefully and critically. And we pray as we reflect on your words to us and your gift of language to us, and how we use language and listen to the language of others, we might be better equipped to become better people, more effective in your service and in life. We pray, amen. Ephesians chapter 1, the Apostle Paul, having left behind the language of Jerusalem and Pharisees and Sadducees, and having joined the church at Antioch and headed off on a mission adventure, and interacting with the language of people in Ephesus and the language of Greeks in Athens and Corinth, he writes to the Ephesians, I've not stopped giving thanks, using words and language and prayer, remembering you in my prayer. I keep asking God of Jesus, the glorious Father, that he might give you the Spirit. So beyond language, there is this whole Spirit that gives us life and vitality and wisdom and revelation and knowledge. So we know through language, we know through the Spirit of wisdom and revelation. I pray that the eyes of your heart, which could be thinking, where your language is used, may be enlightened through language education, in order that you may know the hope that you've been called. So it's the language of salvation and the language of calling and the language about Jesus and his life, death, resurrection, and his teaching, that we might discover the riches of the glorious inheritance to become a holy people as we believe. So we not only have the language of God through Christ and the word of God and the Apostle Paul, we also have a faith commitment to that language. So language is important in education. It's important in faith, in our Christian walk. Every week we have the language of the songs we sing. We have the language of the preached sermon. They bring life to us through language. And it's not the language that gives us life so much, it's what they talk about. That is, the language becomes windows and doors to reality that we can step through with our mind as we enter into those realities. And without the language, we don't have the mental understanding to step through those windows and doors of reality. So today we're going to look at the importance of language for thinking and critical thinking, careful thinking in particular, for speaking, reading, writing. And did you know that in speaking, we use 1,000 or 2,000 words, but when you write, you then step into the use of 20,000 words. So it's writing that gives you more words to work with. that makes writing so helpful. And many people would say they don't really know what they're thinking or talking about until they write it down. And for that reason, many people say that even in your classroom, it's worth having your students keep a diary or journal. And I know when I began my teaching in the first couple of years, teaching maths and science and humanities and English, that we encouraged all of our students in year 7 and 8 to do in class at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, 5 or 10 minutes or up to 20 minutes of diary journal writing in which they reflected on the events of the day, and they could include being bullied and the battle and the teacher not answering their question. They could journal that and write about it, and that brought growth in language, but it also brought personal growth as they interacted with language. So language is important in every aspect of life and thinking, not only the subject of language in English, but the method of using language in every subject in maths and science and music and art. So language has relationship with the way in which we understand and interact with the real world. And many have discussed that. So as you grow up in primary school, you think the whole world is what you can see around you, unless your parents have taken you to France or America or England or somewhere. And then you realize that there's language to describe broader, bigger things. Books, of course, take us into bigger worlds. And also YouTube and the internet should take you into bigger worlds. Whether it does or not is much debated. The internet could take you into smaller worlds as you get trapped into smaller ways of thinking. If you only ever go to one game site and you only ever play the one game for 12 hours non-stop, then you probably entered a smaller world than the bigger world that the internet could open up for you. So in seeking to understand the relationship between language and thinking, the first question we could ask is, and I might ask Stephanie and then Gabriella, does reality shape language, or does the language that we teach in our classrooms and that your mum and dad and parents teach you shape your understanding of reality, and the pastor and the youth leader teach you? Does language create reality and understandings of reality, or does reality shape language? If you do really well at this, we'll make you professor and give you a PhD straight away. But Stephanie and then Gabriella.
No pressure. I think it's a bit of both. I think, well, I don't really know where words originated from in way back when, but I think that meaning of words, as it evolves, I think that influences the way that we view things. Like, if I could think of an example, that would be great. But yeah, I think there's different connotations to certain words, and if you're using that when you're talking about a specific topic, then that'll influence the way that people view that topic or that object or something. I don't know.
Yeah, brilliant. That's very well said. We'll develop that a bit more. Gabriella, your thoughts?
I agree that they both influence. I think that the way I was thinking of it is kind of like a cycle. Like, obviously they both have their influence and both have at different moments probably more, like, one, the reality shaping language at some stages may have more relevance and input than maybe the other way around. But I think, yeah, I think they both equally.
And that's very well said, Gabriella. Is as we think about that cycle from reality shapes language, shapes understanding of reality, shapes language, shapes understanding of reality. And so you mentioned the origin, Stephanie, of words. There is the developmental origin of words. And so as a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old grows and they say their first words, Abba, Dada, and Mama, and then they get fed, and then no. And so these different, and when they become 2, it's no, and in the terrible 2s. And so language develops as children move from interacting with reality, from experience, to moving then to putting words to that experience, and then people introducing them to new experiences. The big teaching point to learn is that experience teaches us. So if you use the word hot, and if then someone touches something hot, then they have an experience that sticks with them. And if you mention something beautiful and then go on a holiday and you see a sunset, then you have an experience that stays with you for the rest of your life at times. And so there's a relationship there, and there's a lot of studies on the ways in which children develop understandings of language, which help them understand words. And so in science, we love to get students into the classroom and give them Bunsen burners and test tubes. We want them to experience what science is about, although we're actually setting it up. But so experience is so important in learning. So the more experience that you can give a student, the better you'll be. You also mentioned where the words come from over tens of thousands of years, and there's a whole discussion on evolutionary adaptation and the development of words, and the way in which language develops in ancient Egypt as they developed hieroglyphs, picture language, and then there is the origin of the alphabetic language, and the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet are alpha and beta, the alphabetic language. And so the Phoenicians use an alphabetic language, and the Greeks pick up on that, and the Hebrews have Aleph, Bet, as their first 2 letters. So alphabetic language makes things easier in moving away from the Chinese pictorial language and the Egyptian pictorial language, rather than pictures with 10,000 letters. If you've only got 26 letters in our alphabet, or 24 letters in maybe a Hebrew alphabet, then that's going to be more useful. So there are 2 things interesting to explore: origin of language in humanity, and origin of language as people grow and develop. So fascinating topics and areas to explore. Let's have a look now at some slides that I've put together on language and thinking, beginning with a reminder that these are so important in the classroom. And look, Wittgenstein has said, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. And often when we're studying a subject like language and critical thinking, you want to keep an eye out for key people. And Wittgenstein is one of the key people that would be worth keeping an eye out for. Another one would be Frege, and then there would be others who've written about language and what it means. And if in a class like this we mention Wittgenstein and Frege, then you could go a long way by Googling Frege and language, Wittgenstein and language. That would be really helpful. Can I ask Martha, what do you think Wittgenstein means by the limits of my language mean the limits of my world?
I actually find that a really interesting quote. And what I thought of straight away, actually, I don't know if it's relevant, but I remember a teacher in a year 2 class saying to me that a child needs to, if they can't speak it, they can't write it in regards to forming sentences. And I think that that kind of shows the importance of language and learning, and how that shapes our understanding.
And I think that's another aspect of it as well, is that do we know if the child can understand it? And it's a good idea then to ask questions. And so you've taught for a long time, and then you go around the class and say, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And that's why I often ask, what stood out to you today? And it's fascinating to see what stood out to some people, and the different feedback that we get on what stood out to people there. So I think you summarised that well. John Ralston Saul in The Doubter's Companion, showing the importance of doubt in thinking, says, our civilization is unable to do what individuals cannot say. So that's very similar to what Martha said. You can't do or understand what you can't say and put words to. Not always true. Sometimes you can play some music and feel something, or write some poetry and feel something, and you've not actually got all the words you need. But there's a truth in you can't fully understand what you can't say. Individuals are unable to say what they can't think. And even thought can only advance as fast as the unknown can be stated through conscious, organized language. So as we state things in language, journal, write it down, think it through, and knowledge and understanding grows. And in the 12 weeks or so of this subject, we're introducing you to new language and ideas. We're encouraging you to write down your thoughts and ideas, and you're growing through growth in understanding of language. I like this little joke here. Did you know the English have 400 words for no? I would add that they learn them all when they're 2 years of age. Terrible too. And so, so the principle suggests that language affects our worldview, and worldview affects our language. And let's take as an example a chair, a table, triangle, love, red, colour. If I could ask Josie, then Shelley Ann, how would you describe a chair, Josie, to a blind person? And then Shelley Ann, how would you describe a table to a blind person? So Josie first, how would you describe a chair to a blind person?
Oh, that's interesting. I think, I don't know, I would try to describe it in a way that they'd hopefully understand, but
yeah,
I don't know. But
yeah,
like if I was to say, like, they've got straight, like, things that hard surface, like, would they know what that means? Like, have they always been blind? Or like, well, I mean, then they would know what a chair is, wouldn't they?
Good, that's good. Moving on to Shelley Ann. We got a table here, and Josie said there's straight things as a marker of assignments. I'm horrified by the words it and he and they and things, because I'd rather have the word legs and the legs of Sophie Loren or something, or the legs of the chair. Yeah, Shelley Ann, how do you describe the table to the blind person?
I'd say something about a thick piece of hard wood that you eat off, or write on, or do braille on, or something that you can sit at.
Yeah, like that. So you're describing the material, and then you're also describing the way in which the material is being used. So you're describing the use. Can I ask Stephanie and then Ruben, how would you describe a triangle? And then Ruben, we give the really tough one to love, and then Gabriella, red colour. So Stephanie, a triangle for a blind person.
I think I would maybe try and use like a multimodal approach. So maybe if you have like a triangle, like the instrument, or like something that is in the shape of a triangle, they can feel it and then they can have a bit of an understanding of it that way. But you can also explain that it is, you know, a shape with 3 edges that meet at a point, and the angles add up to whatever they equal. I don't remember.
I think it's 180, isn't it?
I think so. Couldn't remember if it was 180 or 360, but yeah. So you can give them kind of the definition of it, but then also give them an experience of it.
And I love that combination of definition and experience. So experience means they're getting a feel for it, and then definition there is very, very good. Ruben, on from your various levels of expertise and experience in these matters, how do you describe love to a blind person?
I think I'd explain it as a personal experience that you have towards another person or thing, I guess. Yeah, it depends what sort of love you're talking about, what level of love you're talking about.
I like that. Yeah.
So I guess you could say it's a form of emotional attachment.
Yes, very well said. Form of emotional attachment. And you could even then open a packet of jelly beans if it was a class, and you could talk about the difference between love for a jelly bean and love for a stranger who's in need, etc. Gabriella, a really challenging one, red colour. How do you explain that to a blind person?
My mind is going more so to describing to the person, like getting them to imagine, like if they have ever been sunburnt, that feeling of sunburn is red, or if they're really, really angry, that feeling is red. I don't know. That's the only way I could think about that. Or like, yeah, that was where I went with it.
Yeah, and I think there is a biological reason why red stands out to us, perhaps because of fire and burning, perhaps because of blood and the flow of blood to the face, anger, and we can then see people when they're angry. So can I get you all to write down now, without thinking too long, John lives near his friend, what distance? So I'll get you to write down minutes or houses or kilometres or metres. John lives near his friend, what distance? After that, I'll get you to write down Stephen is old, what age? That'll be fascinating. And then Sue is young, what age? So what distance and what age do you consider to be old or young? And then Jill earned a lot of money for doing a job. How much money? So Jill earned a lot of money for doing a job, and you can see I've created a difficulty here because I've not specified enough detail. I hope you do better than this in your essays. So this could be a job that takes an hour, or it could be the job that they have forever or for a year. So the lack of detail creates a problem there, and this exercise shows the reason details are important. In yesterday's class, they said that the distance could be a 5-minute walk, or a few houses away, or 2 kilometres or 5 kilometres. Did you know in Philadelphia, the Amish, they encourage them to have bicycles rather than motor cars and horse-drawn carts. But if you buy a bicycle, it has no pedals on them, because the pedals will destroy society. If you have pedals and can ride too far, then your family could fall apart. And so the bicycle shops in Philadelphia, Amish bicycle shops don't have pedals on them. And so I've seen them heading down to the shops on their push bikes, which are very much push bikes to get their bread and milk. And it does keep the family together. Did you know education only goes up to Year 6 primary? And then you're qualified to become a teacher if you've done to Year 6 primary. So they got a different view of the world, a different world view, and their view of distance may be different to ours. Perhaps two views, Gabriella and Ruben. What did you give to distance? Someone lives near a friend, Gabriella, then Ruben.
I said same suburb, so within 5-7 minutes away.
Yeah, now that almost sounds like someone who drives a car, same suburb, rather than someone who walks. But Ruben, your thought?
I'd say under a radius of about 15 kilometers.
Again, that sounds like someone who drives a car rather than walks. So that's interesting. Look at age. What about Stephanie and Shelley Ann? Stephanie, what age is old? And then Shelley Ann, what age is old?
I said about over 70, 75 is old.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
Okay.
Shelley Ann, what age did you say old?
78.
Yeah. And probably that fits a little bit with what our government tends to say and what physical health slows down. I mean, it used to be 55 to 60 to 65 was considered old 100 years ago. But now with better medicine, it's stretched, as you say, to in your 70s, and then your body slows down. So a lot of people keep working through into their 70s, but then they slow down a lot in their 70s. And then looking at what a lot of money is, we'll now move to our wealth experts, Josie and Martha. Josie, what's a lot of money for doing a job?
Sorry. When you mean for like a job, or like when you're like a singular job, or a...
Yeah, but probably do both. What would be a lot of money for doing a single job, and then a lot of money for a salary, perhaps?
A single job, like, yeah.
Yep.
$400.
Right. Wow. That's
Or but like for like over a period of time, so like just
Yep.
say you went to work for
Yep.
7 hours for a week.
Yes.
I feel like a lot of money for that, it's like $2,000. I feel like that's
Yeah.
a fair bit of money for just a week.
Yeah, and 2,000 a week would be 100,000. A lot of people would say that. Martha, your thoughts on
Yeah. So yeah, for the 100K is what I wrote. I think that's a lot of money. Yeah.
And that's becoming the average salary. There are people working for 40,000, people are working for 50, 60,000, particularly if you work for a church or Christian organization, maybe. And then there are higher salaries. So notice there we touched on ambiguity. An ambiguity is where a sentence can have more than one meaning. So they saw Mrs. Jones and the dog sitting under the table, can have two meanings. James tickled the man with the feather duster, can have two meanings. And Jenny wanted to hear the pop star sing really badly. So there's ambiguity in those sentences, and there's ambiguity in words like it, he, they. So every time you use it, every time you use he, they, she, recognize that there are ambiguities in your sentences. Watch out as well for garden path sentences. The beginning of the sentence leads you somewhere, but you go in a different direction. The cotton clothing is made up of, and then grows in Mississippi. So it actually changes the meaning of the first half of the sentence after you get to the second half. The florist sent the bouquet of flowers was flattered. So the florist sent, we're thinking of a florist sending flowers. and then we're realizing that the flowers were sent to them. And because he always jogs a mile seems a short distance to him. So these are called garden path sentences because the first part leads you down a path and the second part doesn't. But in an essay, the introduction could lead you somewhere and your essay could go somewhere different. That'd be a garden path essay. So you want an essay that tells you at the beginning where it's going, develops along that said path that you were introduced to, and concludes that path at the end. And then language can also have power. Language at times can empower some people. Elite people can control the language. And so if you become a doctor, you may get more language than a nurse. And you may ask the doctor, what does this mean? And they may say, nurse, you don't need to know that. And so language can be a source of power. And if you come from a wealthy family, you may be introduced to language. And if you come from poorer family, then you may not have that language. So there's a relationship between language and power. There's also a relationship between language and worldview. And so the meaning of table and chair that we were talking about before has a meaning according to the worldview that you're talking about. We might ask you in a moment whether you prefer the modern version of the table and chair or whether you prefer a different version. So some people might like an industrial version of the table and chair. So that's a particular worldview, which is different to an Indian version of table and chair, different to a Greek version of table and chair, different to a Gothic version of table and chair, or a Georgian traditional table and chair. These are all quite different to modern views of table and chair. So asking a couple of people, Gabriella and Stephanie and Ruben, which style do you prefer, modern or traditional? And what is it about a modern or traditional table and chair that you like? Gabriella, modern or traditionalist?
I think I like some of the modern ones. But then I think in today's day and age with chairs, we low-key don't have comfort as much as maybe traditional chairs, but I don't know. Yeah. That's just my thinking.
Yeah. And interesting that you talk about the importance of a chair for comfort. I know in some places, they give them a hard chair with no padding. And that's because they don't want them getting comfortable when they're at work. And I went to a bank. I just damaged my leg, had struggling with a bit of pain and had crutches. And I went to the bank, and I won't tell you which of the big four banks it was. They'd removed all the chairs, and all the staff and customers had to stand for the entire time, including myself. And this is because they thought that everything would work a lot better with no chairs. And I wrote the manager a letter. I thought this was not ideal. So yeah, so chairs can have different functions. You could sleep in a chair. Yeah, so chair and table can mean different things to different people. Stephanie, your thoughts about what do you look for in a table or a chair?
I've never thought about it, but I guess functionality is probably my most important thing. So, you know, if I'm buying a table, is it big enough for the number of people who I expect to sit there? Or is it a desk? Does it fit in the right space? Does it have enough space for laptops and textbooks and all that sort of thing? And for chairs, again, probably, yeah, functionality and comfort so that it can actually help me to fulfill the purpose that it's there for, whether it's like a dining chair for like, you know, a meal for an hour, or whether it's a desk chair, which I'm going to be at all day doing study. So make sure it meets the purpose.
And so notice that very word table and chair conveys to you a lot more than just, we're talking about the blind person and 4 legs and the top. There's more going on with a table and chair. Ruben, what are you looking for in a table and chair? Are you a modernist or a traditionalist, and why?
I'd definitely go with a more modern style. And I think that's just because with everything else that we have in our houses these days, it fits more ergonomically and more functionality, I guess, with everything else in the house, with proportions and everything. Yeah, and I guess as a part of that, when you say table, my mind instantly thinks to like a dining room table. So yeah, I guess just simple and nothing too special or out of the way, I guess, of what you have to look at, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And notice that a table can be saying other things as well. Some businesses, they recommend that the bosses actually have a platform and a high seat and a high table, and then the seat in front of the table where an employee comes and sits on is low, and that way the boss can look down on the person. And the bosses have big tables and workers have little tables. So there are power statements in tables and chairs, which you wouldn't necessarily think of. And then in French provincial design of a table and chair, they're wanting it to say something, whereas the modernist view of a table and chair is wanting to say something about modernity. And this reflects worldview that we've been talking about quite a bit, is that modernity is about simplicity, whereas traditionalism is about the rich heritage that we have inherited. And so there are differences between the ancient and the modern. Notice that there is a word that is used, a table, and then there's an image in our mind, and then there's an actual object. And so there's a relationship between word, mental image, picture, and the object. And you've mentioned the function. And then Aristotle wrestled with this very question over 2,000 years ago. He said that when you see a table, it has a form. That is, it has a shape. It has an appearance. That is, it could be rectangular and it could have 4 legs. But it also has matter, which can be quite different. I think a wooden table, hands up those who prefer a wooden table over a metal. And so there's something nice about a wooden table as opposed to the cold feel of a metal table. And then Aristotle said, if you're dealing with tables as they were in the ancient Greek world, a lot has to do with the function of the table. But there are other causes involved in the table. That is, there's the manufacturing of the table. And so if you're manufacturing, if your father was making a table for you, Jesus was a carpenter, they would make tables. There may be pieces of furniture in your house that's been made by a family member. And then there's an agency in the use of the table. That is, how do you use the table? What are you using it for? Sitting at it, studying, eating. And then there's the ultimate goal of the table in an examination room for exams or in a voting booth for voting. And then there's the potential of the table in the future. You might have a table for 2 people who've just got married, but maybe it's bigger because you're going to have children. And so the table can speak about possibilities there. And so you might have a boardroom. Did anyone see Putin's table? So he had a meeting 1-on-1, and the table's as long as a house. You know, he would sit at one end and the person would sit at the other. And so someone's trying to say something when you've got a table that large. Normally short people are the sort of people who have tables that big. So when you use a word like boat or bread or sin or faith, there are words communicated even in the word Jesus. And way back in Genesis 11, they built a tower, but the language broke down because God said, if you claim to speak one language, then something will go wrong. But if you recognize that you speak a diversity of languages, that is, one person says table is, and another person says table is, and one person said friendship is, another says friendship is, one person says love is, and then another person says love is. To recognize that there is difference in language is to recognize humbly that we don't understand fully what the other person means, what the other person thinks. So rather than saying language is to know something, maybe it's better to say language is the beginning of a journey of knowledge, and it helps and assists us in knowledge. But we need to humbly admit when we're working with language that we don't fully know and understand. And when, as a teacher, you're working with students, to ask the students to write down and think about something, we need to recognize some of them may be thinking differently. Some of them may be using words differently. Some of them may have not completed their homework because they entirely misunderstood what was going on. So language is not as easy and precise as we think, but it is so very, very important because it gives us opportunities and life. So let's take our break there for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a further look at language, thinking, critical thinking, and teaching, use of language in the classroom. And we'll also at 10:30, we can give opportunity if there are further questions on the assignment as well. So see you in about 10. Thank you.